Hey everyone, this is Lyra, your perpetually dehydrated Terran analyst. I'm here to analyze some T vs. T and spoil Internet Explorer users around the world. So hopefully I can get through both series, but I'm going to start by looking at the first series between Time and Maru from the Group B WCS Global Finals. And so it's interesting that we have two series of the same players, and we'll see, the things that are the same between them and the ways that the players have adapted. And I'll try and point out throughout the analysis the similarities and differences between what the players are doing and what you might have found in the recent past as far as builds and meta goes, what stands out about their play and what's different or unusual. And with any luck, I can offend some people by pointing out lots of mistakes by two of the greatest Terrans in the world of our time. So Maru's going for, I call this a 2 gas expand, because he's going up to 2 gas, and so the build is gas first, 17 second gas, and the point is that they have enough for Factory and Reaper, enough gas for both simultaneously. This is completely typical of the meta as of last patch, so last season, so not whatever's about to come out after BlizzCon. And this is an expand variation of a 2 gas build, which means that SCVs are pulled off of the refineries once the factory goes down. I think what's unusual is that he's elected to SCV Scout, which costs minerals and sort of sets him behind. But I imagine that Maru has elected to SCV Scout because he assumes he's the stronger player of the two, and thus he doesn't want to get caught off guard. Now, this being the first series, or the first match between the two in these series, this is the first time Maru's seen this build that Time's using, and that's notable because Time's build is interesting, and is part of the reason that I'm doing this analysis at all. And I, without going into the build yet, I'm pointing out that Time's build is a little unusual, although it, I think very soon, if it hasn't already, will become a standard option because of the success in terms of getting into good positions, regardless of the match result, that Time is able to accomplish. But so, having SCV scouted, a 2-Rax by Time, I think it's not clear to Maru how Time had intended to use that 2-Rax, and Maru may have even felt after scouting the 2-Rax that the SCV scout was justified since he scouted a 2-Rax. And so normally a 2-Rax is a pretty aggressive build, and I mean, it's even possible that while Time is showing 2-Rax, there might be a third one proxied or something, and it could be actually an extremely aggressive build. I didn't pay attention to what all Maru's SCV scouted and when, but it is possible that he noticed the lack of second gas, which does suggest from the get-go that Time's build is not going to be aggressive, and that is the case. And so what Time's build does is so it's a barracks first, it's sort of like a delayed barracks first Reaper expand, and it gets this second barracks on 17 supply. So instead of getting, as in Maru's case, a second gas on 17 supply, or from a typical Reaper expand getting, you can queue up 2 extra SCVs to go up to prepare to go to 19 SCVs before upgrading to an orbital. Instead of queuing up these extra SCVs ahead of time, he's getting the second barracks. And so, depending on what build Maru does, there's a potential for these Reapers to be aggressive, and Maru being known for proxy play, if he does that, Time's in a position where he can defend more easily against proxy Reaper aggression, since he's going to have extra Reapers relative to either relative to both a Reaper expand or the standard 2 gas play. This fast techlab with no starport implies he wants to go into a cyclone immediately. Otherwise, you'd get the starport before these add-ons. There it is. And so, I suspect the reason he's getting such an early cyclone is because of having scouted this fast second racks from time. And so, time's build here, like I said, it's barracks first, which is unusual. Normally you see gas first builds, even if it's just a Reaper expand in TVST. Barracks first, 16 gas, 17 second barracks. He makes 3 Reapers and then the command center. After that, the next 100 minerals after CC is the bunker. The next 75 minerals is the refinery. And then the next 100 minerals are 1 marine from each barracks, which you see here. From there, he gets a reactor and a tech lab. When the factory's done, he's going to get a starport, but then lift the factory onto the tech lab, start a cyclone, and then start a third CC before the starport is finished. Or, I think it's before it finishes. If not, it's before there's any starport production. And so, at some point, not far from now, their builds will basically converge. So time's opening is different than something super standard, but he's going into the same sort of things. So you're going to see reactor marine production. You're going to see 1 cyclone, and then followed by tank production, once he can afford it. You're going to see a Raven. This medevac by Maru is not standard. Normally, he would either put the starport on the factory's tech lab once the cyclone was done to start a Raven, or just have the starport make its own tech lab to make a Raven. You know that it wasn't a spontaneous decision to not make the Raven because of this third gas timing. If Maru is going to make a Raven as soon as possible, this third gas has to start when the command center, I guess you can't exactly see it. If you're looking at the progress bar, the command center takes 71 seconds to build. When you're at between 40 and 45 seconds completion, which is approximately when the building health hits yellow if you're using standard visual options. If you then at that point send an SCV to start the refinery, it will finish as the command center finishes, and then you can mine it immediately. And so since Maru's getting this later gas, he can't possibly have expected to afford a Raven. So I don't know, if this is his planned opening from the get-go, or if this is a reaction to the 2 racks once he understood that it was a defensive 2 racks and not an aggressive one. This depot, which you see both players making, is very, very important. The purpose of it is to see a Liberator, Banshee, Hellion drop, or in this case, Marine tank drop, or even just a Raven. If it comes in from this angle, this depot should reveal it. I guess technically it could miss. If the drop or whatever it was hugged the absolute edge of the map, on this map it would miss it, perhaps until it landed, but it still gives you, on average, more heads up. And most players aren't trying to send it along the exact perimeter of the whole map, because then it takes twice as long to get there. So in T vs T, you have to always be thinking about mineral income and consumption. And so what I mean by that is, you see a lot of these depots are made basically as close to where the SCVs are already mining as they can. That ensures that an SCV being pulled from mining doesn't go very far, and when it's done, it doesn't take long to get back to the mineral. And so often, one choice you have then is to make these, your first and second depots in this area so that they don't have to go far away. But then it's important, usually, for this to be your third depot if the first two are here. Personally, I like making this my first one just so I don't have to think about it again. Although, since he's SCV scouted and confirmed no second gas, I suppose that the kind of builds that create a unit that this is designed to spot weren't possible, so he hasn't needed it beforehand. But I think it's typically a mistake, especially out of a 2-gas build, to SCV scout, because you set yourself more behind, so you have fewer minerals with which to react to what you scout. And so I think usually you want to make this as your first supply depot. You'll note, so time has walled, Maru hasn't. I think walling is entirely unnecessary in T versus T. And so you can, as a result, you can afford to make your first step depot over here. So in this case, this is the techlab that the barracks first made that the factory used to get a cyclone. Then he put the starport on that techlab, had the barracks make its own techlab for stim, and had this factory make its own techlab for tank production. That's a possible route, but it's not necessary exactly, depending on what you want to prioritize. And what I mean by that is the factory could stay on this techlab and once it's dropped on it and never lift off. And then the barracks can make a second techlab for the starport to use, and then a third techlab for itself. In this case, Time is electing to de-emphasize tank production, or at least delay it, in favor of faster stim. The Raven timing isn't really affected by these different options. This third gas timing is the SCV that makes the command center. When the CC is done, it starts the refinery. So it's not like a 2-gas build that tries to have the refinery coincide with CC completion. And the reason is because it doesn't have as much tech production, because its tech buildings are delayed by the nature of the opening, since it's a 1-gas opening. And so this is a good test of Time's setup. Time basically blind rushes the bunker. He doesn't SCV scout. I don't think he even sent his Reapers across. I don't think he sent his Reapers even farther than the ramp. And so this bunker is intended to stop or stall any possible option that Maru goes for. Sorry, I'm looking for... There it is, okay. Yeah, I knew Maru had made a cyclone. It's sort of a mistake for it to not already be here. I think he either was indecisive about whether he should keep it at home for defense or bring it with the drop. But so this is, as I said, this is a good test of the setup, and it's testing two things. One, does this bunker buy enough time for Time to get the units out he needs to defend against whatever's coming at him? And two, can he justify de-emphasizing factory production in favor of stim first, and in favor and using this build where the factory makes its own tech lab? And this is why I say it was kind of a mistake for Maru's Cyclone to be lagging behind, because I think if he had brought it immediately, he could have actually killed this bunker already, because while yes, Time is, in theory, prepared for this kind of counter-aggression, having Reapers here to see stuff coming, having the bunker here to stall. There's still a surprise factor when these units show up, because there's no guarantee that Maru does anything aggressive this early, since he had gone for the expand variation of a 2-gas build. And so the moment that siege tank, first hits the bunker, that's when Time knows, oh, this is a real attack, I guess I'll say. It's not just a poke with, some Reaper Hellion or whatever. And so if that first siege tank shot is accompanied with a lock-on, this bunker probably vanishes before SCVs have time to repair it at all. But with the Cyclone lagging behind, the siege tank doesn't have enough burst damage to make that happen. Notice that Time is sort of supply blocked, but functionally he's not, because this command center is about to finish, and if you notice, all of his production buildings are actively producing. None of them are stopped. In theory, this command center, orbital, is stopped. If he tried to, he doesn't have an SCV queued up, and if he did, it wouldn't be able to start, for 10 seconds or something. But what's important at this point is the unit production, so that he can react to potential aggression, or in this case, actual aggression. So don't be... I said at the start I was going to point out as often as I could the mistakes of the players. In this case, this is not a supply block, it's not a mistake, it's a calculated part of the build. And so, during the aggression, Maru's getting his third command, he's getting his first Raven. This timing is extremely standard. What you'll see from Maru later in the series are the more standard editions of the 2-gas expand build, where this starport makes a Raven either before or right after the Cyclone, and then it'll make 2 Ravens, and then the moment that the second Raven is started, there'll be a soft production cut that lets him afford the command center. In this case, he opened with the medevac, not the Raven, so it's still the second production cycle from the starport that sets the timing of this third CC. From these 3-gas, so 2-gas expand into 3-gas builds. There are lots of different ways to play with these numbers. So I'm surprised that Time pulled these SCVs to defend. I don't think it was necessary at all, because he had the tank coming out. I think he actually panicked a bit there. I'm pretty sure he completely holds this without losing a single SCV, in theory. And if you notice, if he doesn't lose these SCVs, he's completely even on workers with Maru. But he has the faster third CC, which means economically he should be completely ahead. But that is a mistake to have lost those SCVs. But I suppose, I say he's panicking, but that's actually a little inaccurate. It's not exactly panicking so much as respecting the fog of war, because he sees this coming from Maru. He doesn't see what's behind it. It's possible that Maru behind this is going for, say, a 3 racks before 3rd CC build, which has gained a lot of popularity in this meta since the stim time buff. And so Time's decision to pull some SCVs to completely crush this part of the aggression, I suppose, makes sense if he's really trying to respect all of the possibilities and not be greedy, since he knows that there's basically no possible build from Maru that has an equally or faster time 3rd CC that also puts these units here at this time. Which means the only way time can lose as the game goes longer is if he's greedy and doesn't crush the attack and loses to aggression in the next minute or so. So what's pretty common, although not universal, this meta is builds that sort of converge on the production of the previous meta's builds, which is the 2 Raven setup, 2 or 3 Raven setup. The difference this patch is often you see 1 Raven and then a lift and a possible swap. And often you're seeing this starport make its own reactor like this, whereas in the previous patch often it was swapping with the barracks. And so, you know, if there was only 1 barracks, this barracks would go in this techlab, or actually this techlab, and this starport would go in this reactor instead of making its own. In this, but very often you're seeing only 1 Raven, and then since the starport's production is done sooner than otherwise, which is to say after only 1 production cycle, unlike Maru's 2, actually he's going into 3, which as I said was a possibility. Sometimes you get 3 Ravens. Last patch, you don't see it this patch, and in this case it's not 3 Ravens but 3 production cycles. And so my point is, when in the old system, when the production on the starport on the tech lab is done, because there are more production cycles happening, that swap is happening at a later point where you have more SCVs to support more mineral income to actually support reactor Viking production at that time. But in these setups that have just 1 production cycle, which is usually 1 Raven, if you put this starport on the barracks and start making Vikings, you're really cutting into your mineral income such that you're delaying the build transition into the mid game. Whereas if the starport makes its own reactor, by the time that reactor's done, you have the mineral income to support it without compromising the other buildings that are coming up. And very often you're even seeing that this starport is actually not making its own reactor, but making a reactor for the 3rd barracks. Although I believe that is not the case with Time's build here. And so some of the things I just described don't apply to Time's setup because it's the 2Rex version. And that's why I'm highlighting it as its own system and setup, despite it having a lot of similarities with what I would call standard, which is and a variation of standard is what Maru has done here. So for example, in the old system, when this Raven is done, you would see it swap with the barracks. So the barracks start stim, and the starport starts Vikings. But there are more adjustments to the meta than just production cycles and add-ons. But I'll get to that later. So Time's money is a little high. This barracks is a little late. He should have afforded it sooner. But, you know, he was busy. And so build-wise, what comes next from Time after this setup, which is 2 racks, Cyclone, Cyclone, Raven, Tank, and then constant tank production and stim. After this is the 3rd barracks, 2 eBays, and then the 4th gas. If you compare that to standard, you'll see what Maru's done, which is after the 3rd CC, immediate 4th gas. And then going into 3 racks and the swap. And so that's the standard. So the initial Viking production here is again standard of the old meta, the old system. Very often this patch you're seeing the first 2 units being medevacs, and sometimes even the 2nd reactor production cycle being a 2nd pair of medevacs before any Viking production. And that's because with the faster stim coming out, players are often valuing mobility and the potential for aggression, or the potential to react to aggression, over the longer lasting value of these more defensive units, the Vikings. But so they're going to converge like completely in their production very soon. Maru's about to get 2 eBays, Time's about to get 2 eBays and his 4th gas, and then they'll have essentially identical production, despite having completely different openings. This is unusual, though, this move. I think he feels safe to make this move on account of having successfully defended Maru's aggression. So he suspects that Maru's going to sit back and just macro up, and that maybe he hasn't remade some of the units that he's lost. And if he's following the same model Time is, where he has these 2 medevacs instead of the 2 Vikings, which it turns out he has instead, if Maru has 2 medevacs instead, then this attack is very difficult for him to fend off if it gets into position. And so with the Vikings, with the 2nd Raven, which are a little atypical this patch, that attack is shut down. But if Maru was following the same rules that Time is, getting only 1 Raven, getting medevacs before, then Time's build would have found a much stronger opening there. Because instead Maru has some medevacs that can't help him defend, and only 1 Raven to make auto turrets or use interference matrices, etc. Now, remember, this is the first time that Time has seen anything on Maru's side of the map. He did not SCV scout, he did not send his Reapers across the map, and then he was busy defending aggression rather than utilizing it. So, it's easy to see that this didn't work, therefore it's a mistake, but that's not exactly accurate. He was able to see the way that Maru is playing, and I think that will help him in the rest of the first series that they play, because they're both trying to get used to each other's styles. And so notice, remember, Time had lost 7 SCVs earlier, and he was able to take out 4 of Maru's, but he had lost more SCVs than Maru had lost, and some of his SCV production wasn't perfect, wasn't constant, because he was busy defending, and because he had lost some mineral income from having to pull SCVs to defend. And then despite all of that, they're even on workers now. Notice both going up to 5 racks. Neither player will add more barracks than 5 before the 4th CC goes down. So it's a little surprising that Time's out on the map, since he just lost a bunch of units. He lost a siege tank and, 12 Marines, 2 medevacs here, basically for free. You can see he's lost a lot more in terms of army value than Maru has. It's unusual that Time's moving out, but it's sort of characteristic of his play. Now, one thing that I heavily fault Maru for in this whole series, and we already see it now, is he's not, and I don't know why, he's not disciplined about posting spotter marines, which is to say, he has no vision here, he has no vision here, the ground paths that lead into his position. Now, he has marines in place for drop play or air play coming this way, and his air force here for drop play or air play coming this direction, although it's a little far east, leaving a hole here, but I suppose this is an adaptation to the fact that when time did come in by air from this side of the map, he did fly here. A bit of a gamble, because if time does the same thing, if these units are in a drop and they come from this angle, and he assumes that Maru's going to be in this spot and comes up this way, then he gets in for free a second time. But, you know, it's a gamble. You can't always expect it. But so, time's crossing the map, and Maru doesn't know. Now, he has a decent preemptive setup, but it's not infallible. I mean, the army values aren't too different. Maru has the lead because of how much time threw away here. But if you put all of time's army value in one spot, it easily overwhelms the defenses that Maru has in any one spot. Because the aggressor has the initiative, which enables him to consolidate his forces in a way the defender can't. Or rather, the way the defender can't if he doesn't see the attack coming. Which is why marine spotters are really good. Now, okay, he does have a sensor tower, which, you know, functions the same way as a marine spotter, although it's more expensive. But, you know, that only helps him here. What I really hate about sensor towers is that it's not an active form of scouting. You haven't physically sent a marine to see what the sensor tower sees, so it can be easier to not notice stuff in it. You kind of just assume that what you see in your minimap is what you have been seeing. I think it's a little harder to notice that, oh, something's new, something's different, just because something walks in the circle. And since the enemy sees your circle, they can take advantage of it. So yes, the circles does guard this ramp, this spot, where I would have liked to have seen a marine spotter. But ultimately, it doesn't guard right here, which means time's entire army value can be consolidated right here, and Maru won't know about it until he looks at his minimap as the force crosses this line. Or this line. Yeah, okay, yeah, there it is. You can see it here. Time's entire army can be here, and Maru won't know. If he attacks here, yes, this is a good defensive setup. But with good control and the element of surprise, time can overwhelm this just by having his forces consolidated. Whereas a marine scouter, just here, provides vision to here, which gives basically twice as much time for Maru to react. And because you physically sent a marine there, and since you have something to lose as in this case, time's forces approach, I think it's easier to stay on top of it because it's a more active form of scouting. So I'm surprised that Maru's 4th CC has started sooner. That's interesting. So I pointed out earlier that time had an SCV lead, but now Maru has the SCV lead. Not really sure what's going on, because They have the same production, the same upgrades. Sorry about this cough. I'll be able to breathe in a second or two. So somehow, as far as I can tell, without cutting production, Maru was afforded this CC sooner, when I would have expected time to afford it sooner. But I mean, Maru is both ahead on supply and ahead on the CC. Like, these supply depots that Time is making, Maru already has done. I don't know, maybe he was scanning more. I mean, we saw Maru scan Time once. Maybe this is just a matter of... No, because here's 3 mules. I don't know, Time's done something strange here with his macro. I can't figure it out. Okay, there it is. I mean, it's not much behind, but it is behind. And I expected it to be the other way around. Okay, so from this point, usually the next set of expenditures after this CC goes down is some form of turret defense, a turret perimeter. On this map, you want like 1, 2, 3 turrets, something like that here. And then, I don't know, maybe 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, something like that. Those do not all have to go down at once. Probably 1 at a time. You know, 1, the same SV makes the next one, same SV makes the next one, so that the full perimeter is completed, but without drastically taking away from your mineral income. And then after that, once the turrets are up, the next mineral expenditure is 3 more barracks. And or tech buildings. So Maru's getting second factory, Time's getting second factory. These are, I'd say, the latest possible times for the second factory. It can come on 3 racks, it can come before the 3 racks, it can come on 5 racks before the 4th CC, or here on 5 racks after the 4th CC. Usually you're going to see these new barracks before starports, though. And so, the income that they have on 3 base, because it has enough surplus to afford the command center, it can therefore also afford things like missile turrets, more production buildings, tech buildings, etc., even before this new base is up and running. But then supporting, 3 more barracks, 2 more starports, the second factory at the same time as these other upgrades, I should say the next set of upgrades, that requires the income from the 4th base. So no turrets yet. Players are trying to make me a liar. I know this is something that the casters noted. Not sure if they noted it during this series or the next one by these players. They noted that the players have been pretty slow to get missile turrets up because they're trying to, in theory, be more efficient with their spending so that they can be ahead of their opponent. But I don't actually believe that at all. I don't agree with the casters there. Oh, that's funny. I did not notice that. Maru lifted... The reason why he had this extra tech lab is because he lifted the barracks off of it to make another reactor. Time didn't do that. This extra tech lab came from the starport. And the reason why he has an extra tech lab from the starport is because since he had a 2-rack setup, the second barracks could make its own tech lab, whereas Maru had a 1-rack setup initially, so his had to take the starport's tech lab. But so I'm saying that I don't agree with what the casters are saying, that the players are trying to just max out their production and are doing so at the expense of turrets, because you don't see the extra barracks from either player, so it's not accurate, and Time is pooling quite a bit of money. Trying to find out what's going on with Maru's spending, why his money is so much lower, despite also not having the production. I can't figure it out. Again, another mystery. Well, his money's pulling up now. I think maybe I just paused at a moment that was favorable for him. See, look. He takes this base, but doesn't have a marine spotter. And there's no new sensor tower to make up for that fact. I don't understand it. And I pointed out earlier that when Maru was in a extremely defensive position, he was covered from air attacks by having Marines here. Now, sure, yeah, the sensor tower can see stuff coming, but that's sort of a moot point if you don't have assets to move into position to deal with it. The reason I'm bringing this up is because we can see that with no spotter, Maru has allowed Time to get this close no matter what. Now, let's say there's not an expansion here. You know, maybe it's still here or something. Time can get here. This is the ring. Time can get here with, these Marines and medevacs, load up and boost. If he boosts from here, there is no way that Maru can move these forces from out on the map or from over here to either defend the third or to defend his main. And so that's where, at this point, both a combination of the spotter Marines and turret perimeters keep you safe. These are things that Maru is consistently overlooking. Now, to be fair, so is Time. Time has no Marine spotter here to see stuff coming from air, no Marine spotter here to see stuff coming across the bridges, no spotter here to cover this, although in this case his army's here. But I suspect when he moves that army away, he won't leave a Marine spotter in its wake. And he has no missile turrets. I don't think he has a single one on the entire map. Now, because Time is so aggressive and is always seizing the initiative, Maru doesn't really have a chance to punish Time for not having these disciplined doodads. If it was a more even game in terms of activity, I think Time would get punished for these mistakes. Now, I'm complaining that I think Maru was both out of position and not scouting effectively, not being prepared for, not respecting the fog of war, basically. And here we see that he is cleaning up the attack. Okay, but he's cleaning up the attack at the expense of 12 SCVs. He's cleaning up the attack at the expense of, build time on this planetary, which has been lifted. The base isn't mining. And so he's in altogether a worse spot. And that's only because Time, or I should say this is getting cleaned up only because Time traded his time in these units for forcing a lift here and killing SCVs. Not that I'm saying that's a bad trade. I think it's an excellent trade. My point is, if these units don't waste their time shooting a high armor repairable building, but instead get here or on top of the production here, he can get even more damage done. I'm not saying that that's the safer move, that he should have gone for it. I'm just saying that the fact that Maru is cleaning this up doesn't contradict what I said earlier, that he was not prepared for such aggression. I'm surprised Time didn't boost these out with some of the Marines sooner. I think he stood here and fought way longer than he needed to, but I imagine he was busy getting this set up. So, Maru's lost mining time and income from this blunder, and that's what's preventing him from being able to afford extra barracks. Time doesn't have such a blunder, and as you can see, his money is consistently staying high because he has a higher income than he can spend efficiently with his production capacity. Now, what's happening here is basically the same thing I was just complaining about, which is Time is forced to play in this very passive defensive position because he cannot actively react to what Maru's doing, because he can't see it coming because he doesn't have Marine spotters. Oh look, a missile turret. These starports are a little late. No, I don't think Time did anything spectacular there. I think Maru just tried to force his way into a position that he had no business forcing his way into. I imagine what Maru was thinking was that he had killed a bunch of units here, and that he should have a bigger army. And then, of course, he could see that he had stolen a march in Time and gotten this far and gotten his tanks up without being contested. And that since he had taken economic damage here, that he needed to get something done or else just remain behind the rest of the game. But the way he handled that was not good, because now he's enormously behind on army value. I'm a little surprised to see a reactor instead of 2 tech labs. Yeah, Maru went for the 2 tech labs. I think this is more standard. It was all quite messy. I'm surprised to not see a Raven here. I think he's just smashing the V button without thinking about the fact that he made this tech lab. Yes, I mean, I know part of the reason he has a tech lab is to get advanced ballistics, which is what the fusion core is for, but also it's quite important to remake some Ravens at this point, because look, we have local tank superiority for time. I mean, he's got what, 7 versus 4, but it's still a pretty sketchy prospect to get into range of these tanks. Whereas if a Raven pops up and matrices even just 2 of them, these tanks get into an insurmountable position. People understand that very well at the start of the game, but it remains true this far in. It's hard to justify Raven production before this point, because the rest of your money is going into making these tanks in the first place. But especially as you max, and the only reason both players are not maxed is because of Maru's suicidal attack here. As you max and have similar army compositions and numbers, Ravens are a really good way to give yourself local superiority, which then can snowball into an actual advantage. Yeah, see? Maru's making the Ravens. Okay, so I fast forwarded a bit. The exact action isn't that important. If you want to look at the action, you can look at the VOD or the replay yourself. There's this enormous Venn diagram of sorts of sensor towers everywhere, and I wanted to point out that these sensor towers are completely inadequate on their own. Maru is completely exposed to anything coming by air from this way. So is time. Time is completely unprepared for anything coming this way. There's no way to defend this from a drop. Even just one Liberator basically disables this whole base, despite there being a missile turret. There's no air spotters, there's no spotters by ground. Something like a small number of Marines and like 1 or 2 siege tanks could give time a lot of grief here. Force him to pull most or all of these SCVs off mining and switch to repairing, turning this base from a source of income to a source of spending, which is inefficient. I don't think that's a spotter. No. There really are just no spotters on the map, and I don't understand it at all. Over and over, a lot of the chaos of this match has come from the players accidentally bumping into each other or being caught out of position and forced to quickly maneuver. Okay, I'm assuming that's a time scan, although I'm not sure what prompted him to scan there. But I mean, if he scans there and instead sees this army moving west, if he sees, 4 medevacs, 5 medevacs, 4, and this Viking Raven Air Force are being loaded up to hit the Nat, what can time do about it? Nothing, because there's no defenses to slow it down. So the scan itself isn't enough. Okay, so I've complained about it multiple times. neither player has added more than 5 barracks, and until now, their money has not really gotten high at all. Mostly that's because the game has been so chaotic. This is the first time that either player has maxed, and so as they max, they're slowing down in production. I mean, Maru literally can't build anything else. Time has a little bit of surplus supply, but I think he's waiting to see what exactly he needs to polish off the max. Because if he makes 12 more Marines, that might not be useful if instead he needed, 6 more Vikings, for example. Hey, that was a spotter from Maru. I think it might have been an accident, but it did deter this force by time. Oh look! Missile turrets. It only took him the whole game to get to that point. So, I really think both players should have made these missile turrets and in other places sooner. But at least you can see that the players themselves are aware that they should have them, and they're getting them no later than their first max. So if you have trouble staying disciplined at spreading out vision and static defense and stuff earlier in the game, at least try and remember to get it as your money goes up as you max. Because at that point, there's no excuse. Well, I don't think there's anything else to show in this replay, so I'm just gonna skip to the next one instead of fast forwarding through it. I've definitely spent enough time on this game. I want to at least get through the first series of them on this video or stream. Hopefully I can make it a video. Hopefully this sounds better than last time. Oh. Actually, this is a terrible example. I should have skipped to the game 3. So, this is the only time in the entire series Time doesn't use his 2-Rex build, and it's the only time in the entire series that Maru does use his proxy. And basically my guess is Time was assuming that Maru was going to do something very greedy, because it's Thunderbird, to take advantage of the fact that it's normally very difficult to attack and easy to expand. And so I imagine he figured that if Maru is being greedier than normal, that if Time used his safe 2-Rex opening, he would just get really behind in a way that he wouldn't be able to make up for. Since, relative to both a Reaper expand and a 2-gas expand build, his 2-Rex variation lets him be aggressive sooner. And so even if he gets behind economically, he can normally justify the build with aggression. But it's so hard to be aggressive on this map because of the way the third is set up. So that he might just be stuck behind the whole game if he elected to use that build. I think that's his reasoning. So instead he tried to go for just a gas first Reaper expand, but then scouted the aggression and had to adapt to this setup instead. And basically, combination of Maru had a build order advantage, and then Time also reacted poorly in multiple places. Okay, now, this one's good. This shows, I guess, the point of some of the things that I was griping about in the first game. You know, I was complaining about stuff that wasn't really being shown in that game, but it will be here, I promise. That's why I mentioned it. Notice, same deal. Time is barracks first, 2 racks. Maru is gas first, 2 gas. About as different openings as is possible. Okay, in this game, Time did SCV scout. I'm pretty sure he did not in the first game. But I imagine he SCV scouted because he had just lost to the proxy in game 2. Notice the third gas is going down sooner than in game 1 for Maru. The rest of the build is identical to what he did in game 1. This gas timing is faster. It's faster because this is going to either make a techlab or take this techlab to make a Raven as soon as it's done. And so you need that third gas. So you need this third gas not just to make the Raven, but to make a factory unit after the Raven without cutting a lot of production time. This barracks not making a tech lab is strange. It's different than what he had done previously. And he skipped the cyclone. So I guess this barracks not making a tech lab goes hand in hand with the cyclone being skipped. And so he started the third CC on just 2 Marine, 3 Reaper. Whereas before, he was 2 Marine, 3 Reaper with a cyclone started, and then CC. So in this case, he cut the tech lab on the barracks, because he doesn't need that tech lab if he's not making a cyclone as soon as possible. If he doesn't care about when that first unit comes out, because he's prioritizing the command center, the factory can make its own tech lab. Well, I'm surprised that Maru made this medevac. I expected a tech lab into a Raven, but he seems to be forcing aggression against Time's opening. As you can see though, since he didn't make the Raven, his gas is getting a little high. This Viking's very strange, but I think it's a direct adaptation to... I guess it's both to compensate for the fact that he doesn't have a cyclone, and a direct adaptation to what Maru had done to him, which is this exact play in game 1. I mean, if he's making a Raven instead of a Viking, that Raven doesn't do anything here without the help of the cyclone, the way a Viking does. I think it's funny that he's getting the cyclone. Maybe he went for the tank before cyclone, because this was a tank in Maru's build in the first game as well. So Maru's setup in this game is identical to game 1, except that he got the third gas sooner I questioned why he bothered getting the third gas sooner. I would call this an on-time third gas, but only on time if the first unit coming out of this is the Raven, not the medevac. He's been consistently floating gas since he got the third gas timed for Raven production and then didn't make the Raven. And he's also been a little fast and loose with his factory production. From time, the opening is the same from game 1 with the changes that the first unit out of this was a tank, not a cyclone. Although did he go back for the cyclone? Yes, here it is. So tank before cyclone and command center before factory unit. But he's going to converge into the same things, which is 3 racks, 2 E-bays, then 4th gas. And Maru's setup is the same as well. And so, by the time the 4th gas goes down, their setups are identical. Worker counts are identical. Time has a slight lead, because his CC's landed making SCVs. It's close though. Not sure why these two barracks were built at different times. A little messy. It's nice to have them start at the same time, so that the add-ons start at the same time, so that you don't get caught up with production. Because if you are out on the map and you're just jamming down your train marine button, you can skip, if this one started an add-on but this one doesn't, this can just be making marines, and then you would have to actively cancel this specific marine out of all other production, and then start the reactor. Whereas that's less likely to be an issue if these two barracks start at the same time. So, I guess Maru technically did have a spotter, but it was over here as an air spotter, which is strange because he already has his air force in that position. Now, he does have this as an air spotter coming this way. No ground spotter here, but these are probably forward enough to cover that. So already Maru's setup is a little better defensively and vision-wise than in the first game, but he has still allowed time to steal a march on him, because the first he saw of this was when it killed this marine here. And, Maru has a decent setup, but as you're about to see, not a good enough one. Mostly he's set up here. Why? Because he's aware that he has no vision here, and that this setup defends him from this attack route and this attack route. And so this spotter needed to be like here, or here or something. There's no point in having an air spotter while his air force is in position this early, since he's playing defensively with these Vikings. And so basically, not only is this just annoying, not only is he taking damage, losing money to repair, having lost 6 SCVs, with 1-1 cancelled, Maru is just completely losing. And, part of this was a slow reaction. These two, I think one of these tanks inched up. Maybe both of them moved slightly, but these tanks didn't budge, and he just kind of retreated into a very passive position where he couldn't do anything. This is strange because he has the Ravens. I mean, he has 2 Ravens, Time had 1, which he lost. In theory, these Ravens should enable Maru to crush this attack by Time, but he was just caught off guard by Time coming up this ramp. Part of it, as I said, is this spotter not being in position. I think the other part is just that Maru thought he was solid here. He didn't think there was an opening, so he didn't respect the position of Time, and so Time stole a march on him, calling his bluff. So, I mean, this is funny. I assumed actually that Maru had taken more damage. Maru has taken less damage than Time. Maru has traded more efficiently in cleaning this up, and is completely losing anyway. Basically, Maru is in a position where the longer the game goes, the more behind he gets because he's so behind on upgrades. I mean, Time is more ahead on 2-2 than Maru is on 1-1, so he has to get something done, or he really can't expect to get anything done, but he, I think, feels compelled to try before he gets locked out of the game completely. And so his assets were army value from having cleaned this up, and air control from having the Viking lead, the Raven lead, and he'd slipped in a Liberator. But it just didn't matter, both because Time controlled very well there. He had split up his forces coming from this angle and this angle, which created an instant concave. He didn't actually have to micro it. And he's up 2 sets of upgrades, or 1 pair of upgrades. What I find most hilarious is, remember I pointed out the things that Maru was doing well earlier. He had vision of the bottom of this ramp. He had an air spotter here. He had air defense here. And he had a misplace, but he did have a spotter here. Well, now he doesn't have air defense for his net. He doesn't have an air spotter. He doesn't have a ground spotter. No ground spotter. No ground spotter. No air spotter. And look, Time's coming in from a spot, one of the best air paths, because you can bypass the slow zone going under here. And so the same thing that got Maru in trouble, 2 minutes ago, is getting him in trouble right now. It's insane to me that he didn't correct that in this game. Like, probably he's so catastrophically behind, there's no way he can come back anyway, but he should at least try and correct the mistakes he's already made before he makes a habit of continuing the same mistakes within the same series. So if he then, in his losing position, or I should say lost position, focuses on vision so that he can react to what Time does, even if it doesn't change this game, it helps him remember to do that in the rest of the series. Because, it's 1-1 right now, and it's about to be 1-2. But so if he starts doing the right thing from here on out, there's no reason why he can't come back and win, because Maru is still a god. So I just want to point out, despite this being a mess, we have 4th CC on 5 racks, followed by 2nd factory, double upgrades in armory. We go over here. Time doesn't have that 2nd factory, but he's being more aggressive with his units. So, oh no, he does. Okay, sorry. I'm surprised he built it there. this techlab exists for this factory, but okay. Yeah, I guess he forgot about it. But so, 5 racks, 4 CC, double upgrades. I'm just pointing this out. This is the standard pathway, build-wise, from this point in the game. Notice earlier I pointed out that despite, having his upgrade sniped and taking economic damage, that Maru previously had gotten the upper hand on trades. That's no longer the case. And so time is ahead on army value, ahead on workers, ahead in every way, well, yeah, every way but air control. But that's because he had made extra medevacs and sacked them here. And so, while I paint a bleak picture, if you're ever stuck in the position that Maru is, however you get there, the way you get out of this is you hard turtle with a good Viking count. You focus on Vikings, tanks, and upgrades, and you just turtle, because eventually you'll max. And once you max, you have the opportunity to go toe-to-toe with your enemy again. And if you can either outmaneuver him or trade more efficiently, it's possible to come back. Which is why I'm so surprised that Maru's vision is still so horrendous, because having good vision is part of a successful turtle, which can prevent him from taking further damage, or give him intelligence of opportunities to pounce on. So what that was, is he was trying to, it was a gamble. The last time was here, out on the map, he had this ground force in conjunction with this drop, and the drop did a lot of damage to Maru. Now, Maru still has, okay, he made a turret, yay! Maru still isn't super prepared for defending drops, but he gambled that time would do the exact same tactic, and preemptively countered it, sending these Vikings out, away from his base, away from his defensive position, because if he can catch this drop and eliminate it, then he can consolidate his force and prevent time from using his big force at all. But time didn't do that, so these Vikings are just out of position. I'm not exactly sure what time's doing, to be honest. The ship, well, the vehicle and ship plating is useful. It helps your Vikings trade much more effectively. Times 3-3 is slow. He must have been slow to start it. Just the result of everything I've already described. Nothing to see there. Same setup. Time is Barrack's first 2 racks, Maru is gas first 2 gas. Excuse me. Notice gas pool lets him expand with this SCV. Interesting. Okay, so Time is doing the same thing add-on-wise that he did in the previous game, where unlike his Game 1 setup, where this barracks made a tech lab for the factory, instead the factory is just making his own tech lab. The difference being, normally, right now, you see he has 100 gas, normally this factory would already have a tech lab and would start a cyclone right now. The only reason to delay this is if he's getting the third CC immediately, the way he did last game. Okay. But then he didn't. So he's just getting a late cyclone. I think he was considering doing the third CC timing the way he had last game, but then changed his mind on the spot. I guess worried that Maru would do something aggressive. Okay, so this gas timing was the same as last game, which is this refinery started before the CC was done, so that it could be up and running in time for this, which is letting him go Raven first for the first time. The other games he's gone medevac first, and he hasn't really justified it. He got some damage done in the first game, but it didn't put him in a winning position, and he got nothing done in the second game, or third game, excuse me, the previous one. And so now he's switched into a completely standard setup. Now this is a little interesting. Normally, as I said previously, this third CC coincides with the second Raven. In this case, he's cut factory production to afford this third CC now. So it's a slight adaptation from what he's done previously. It's greedier. But clearly he doesn't see that he's able to damage time. Okay, so here's something I talked about earlier, where so he's made two Ravens. Normally you have two Ravens, then the third CC, then a swap, where the barracks takes the starport's tech lab, the starport takes the barracks' reactor, and it makes either Vikings or medevacs. In the first and third games where Maru had this setup, he made 4 Vikings and then medevacs with this reactor. In this case, it's not a full swap. The starport is just losing its add-on, donating it to the barracks to make stim, and then this reactor is for the third barracks, not for its own production. Then it will lift and make another reactor for its own production. And usually, if you see that happen, the first units coming out of the starport are medevacs, not Vikings. And part of the point is, if you're hastening your marine production by giving this third barracks immediately a reactor, such that none of these barracks have to make their own reactors, they can just produce marines as soon as they're up, you have more marines. That makes you safer defensively, but it also gives you an asset that can be used offensively. And so the medevacs enable the higher marine count to be more aggressive without compromising defense, because even though he doesn't have Vikings, he has a high enough marine count that medevacs can be used to maneuver units, within your own setup to react to enemy aggression if that happens. I really don't think he needed to do that, because the moment he lifts this out of the way, the tank can come this way. And once a second factory is built on this techlab, the tank might either come out from over here or should still come this way. I don't think it would be trapped between the add-ons. I don't think it can fit. Oh well. So, interestingly, Time has deviated from his setup in the same way that Maru has, which is to say that the starport made this reactor for the third barracks, whereas previously the starport has made its own reactor and this barracks has made its own reactor. And I suspect the reason that both players have made the same adaptation is because of how exposed this wall is. Or not wall. I guess it's a wall. The edge of the main. It's very exposed from drop play. And so the issue with playing defensively with Vikings the way Maru had is, where are you going to put the Vikings? Put them here, you get dropped here. Put them here, you get dropped here. You know, put them here, you get dropped there. Or put them here, you get dropped here, etc. Like, there's so many different spots you have to drop. And so many different avenues of approach by land also, that there's actually no conceivable way, really, this early to cover everything if you're trying to play defensively. So instead, getting extra marine production gives you more units to either spread out or more units with which to be forceful, to be out on the map, to deter the enemy from dropping, because they'd be at risk of taking counter damage. Now, I said it, I think on this map it's very difficult to cover everything, but Maru's trying. This is a huge change from the way he played the last few games. He has a lot more vision than before, so he is adapting. So that's good. Maru's macro's been a little suspect, though. This factory's been idle for a long time. I don't know why. So yes, this is the first production cycle from the starport, and it is a departure from what he did in the last games where he made Vikings first. Ugh. And just as I was praising Maru for having spread so much vision, he's F2'd and retracted everything, and now he only has vision of this ring, which I find hilarious because his army is already in the spot that this sensor tower is, which means this sensor tower isn't making him any safer, because the sensor tower only makes him safe in this area where his army is, and the army makes him safe by being in this area. So for example, no drop defense this way, no drop defense this way, and he's even completely unprepared for a land attack coming this way. I mean, hell, even something coming here, yeah, it marches through area that's covered by the sensor tower, but it's not clear to me how Maru gets into position to react to it before he's out of position altogether. I like this trick that Maru's done. I haven't seen it before. Because in Maru's setup, every add-on swap, or I should say every building has an add-on swap, and so there's no extra techlab the way there was in Time setup, although he had to destroy it. And so in Time setup, the second factory can go on the extra add-on, and in Maru's setup, there usually isn't one, but obviously there's nothing else for this techlab to make. And since Time's using a biocomposition, there's no reason to make Marauders, so he literally doesn't need a techlab on a barracks. Unless he wants to make Ghosts, but those aren't meta for some reason. And so he's just having the techlab barracks make its own reactor. That's something he did in the first game, but not in the previous game. So the casters, I remember they noted this, that Time respected the fog and retreated from this position, but actually it's not clear at all how Maru defends. If these units attack instead, this tank gets 0 kills, dies instantly, these Vikings die instantly, these SCVs have to run, these depots die, maybe the command center, or maybe refineries, etc. Well, probably not the command center with these units here, but the SCVs do run, this tank and these Vikings do die, and if that's all that happens, it's still favorable for Time. Sort of proof of concept of what I've been talking about, that there's a lot of dangerous paths on this map that Maru is not really respecting. And likewise, that Time is not. I mean, see, these units do defend him from ground attacks, but they don't defend him from air attacks, which he can't see coming. Missile turrets. What's funny is Time's sensor tower actually sees all these drop paths, and he's still preparing for them. Or I should say, respecting their strength with these missile turrets. This is absolutely correct. I'm just surprised he's coming so late, and surprised that Maru is not doing it, because Maru's sensor towers cannot see this path, and there's also no missile turret defense. Absurd. Okay, and he's getting punished for it. I wanted to note that I had praised Maru in Game 1 for when he made the second and third starport, that he made 2 tech labs. I really think that's better than the 2 reactors, but here he has the same setup that Time used in Game 1. And I guess the jury's still out on whether or not he'll use it this game. I think that, I mean, I suppose his attention is on this force, but I think that even with these tanks a bit damaged, and this is not a bad setup at all by Maru. I'm pretty sure Time can break this, though. Oh well. So Maru has just completely stolen a march on Time. It's sort of the nature of this position. It's easier if you can follow my cursor on the minimap, easier to go from here to here than from here to here. Or actually from here to here. And I guess that's something where a spotter alone wouldn't account for. A spotter would just confirm the time that he was out of position, but it was a bold move by Maru to completely ignore the threat of this army, which was here, to ignore its ability to push up this ramp and its ability to drop here, which had already been dropped. Also, one thing that is really working against time is that his second and third starports are so late. I mean, I don't think he's used them at all. And so, he doesn't have... I mean, he had made a pair of Liberators, but against the Air Force of Maru, they're irrelevant. He doesn't have the extra tech units he needs to stall this force, or to enable him to flank it. Basically, there's no advantage in splitting his forces because coming it this way is equally bad as coming this way. Maru's position is basically insurmountable given the units that time has. And so basically, this position is made possible because time surrendered the initiative. He successfully dropped Maru's main. He had a threatening force here that he respected, I guess, the fog of war, and retreated. And by retreating and surrendering the initiative at the same time, he handed the initiative over to Maru, who pushed. I didn't notice if he went through the center or if he went this way. I don't think it matters which. I think he must have gone this way. Yeah, so Maru's tanks were here. His army was coming out of the main after defending the drop. It took this path here. Meanwhile, Time's army did this and basically didn't get farther than this. You know, half of it got into here, just in time to get smashed by Maru. And so I guess... So, surrendering the initiative allowed Maru to be aggressive, but Time not having either a good rally or a good defensive setup with his newly made units, maybe his macro had slipped while he was aggressive, I'm not sure. Not having that kind of defensive setup here at clearly his most valuable expansion meant that he had nothing to stall Maru, so there was no way for him to break Maru's attack. So it did take a combination of factors. It wasn't just that, oops, Time retreated. There was more to it. But so at this point, at this point, Time is behind in literally every single... Well, I guess he has a tank lead now. It's not clear to me how we can use it since he's so behind in the Air Force, though. Enormous army value deficit. So this was funny. I noted earlier that the distance between this spot and this spot is about the same as from here to here, which worked to Maru's favor when pushing here, but to Time's favor when counterattacking here. This map is a mess. I guess Time got bored and and sacked his army. So this map, like Triton, has a similar issue where the mains are very exposed by tank pushes up to their edge and from drops and just general airplay. And so if we see both players making the same adaptations to their build, it would fit the theory that those adaptations were a product of the map and not a product of each other's play necessarily. Oh. So Maru went for a gas first Reaper expand. Not a 2-gas build. Time is the same setup. And in this setup, 2 racks versus Reaper expand favors time, at least in the short term. And time was taking advantage of that. So this command center timing is the same that time used in Game 3 on Winter's Gate. That's the first time he's done that. Or no, I lied. Wait. Yes, sorry. So, okay, so in Game 1, the barracks built this tech lab, and this factory made a cyclone. Then it lifted after the cyclone to let the starport make to use this tech lab. Game 3, the factory made its own tech lab, like we see here, but then it made tank cyclone and then tank production. Here, we have the factory donating its tech lab as it did in Game 1, but before making even a single cyclone. Whereas Game 1, it's Cyclone CC. So certainly this setup seems that you can play with it in a lot of different ways. It's not clear to me if there's a rhyme or reason to these subtle differences. Okay, so what I was alluding to with the map stuff is I expect to see this making a reactor for the barracks on account of the main being so exposed by air. So we'll see if it keeps the reactor for itself or if it donates it to the barracks. We can... Okay. So, interestingly, we have half of the adaptations made by Maru in this game, although it could just be the product of having gone gas first Reaper expand. But so last game, the starport gave the third barracks a reactor, and then, when building its own reactor, made 2 medevacs instead of 2 Vikings. Here, the starport is not donating the reactor, it's making it itself, and the third barracks make its own reactor, but the production, likewise, is 2 medevacs, not 2 Vikings. And I think we're going to see the same thing from time, since the third barracks is not near the starport, so it's unlikely that they're trading. Yes, okay. So they're converging on the same sort of things as each other, which is different than what they had done last game. I'm sorry, I'm going to rewind that. because that highlights what I've been talking about. Okay, vision-wise, I assume a Reaper saw that. Maybe a scan, I don't know, it doesn't matter. Vision-wise, he has no spotters. If there's a Liberator coming, a Banshee coming, a harassing Raven, I mean, he knows he has a Raven, anything coming by air, he is completely defenseless despite his entire main being, very vulnerable on account of the map. No vision whatsoever. And yet, he's moving out, or he will in a second.
Add on.
No spotters, no vision, no defense. Which is what I've been getting on him this whole series. At a minimum, a Marine should be sent ahead, or this Hellion or a Reaper, something should be sent ahead.
Complete.
There's no point in... I don't actually think there's any point in moving out, period. He doesn't have stim done, he doesn't have combat shields done, his +1 attack and armor are nowhere near done. I don't see that there is a timing. The only thing I can think of is that he believes he's been aware of some corners that time's been cutting earlier in the series, and that he somehow decided that this timing he was moving out on would punish time if he cut the same corners. Now, having looked at the games from the bird's eye view, I don't see that time has been cutting corners. I don't see that he has been vulnerable to anything, and I'm shocked that Maru thought he was. But ultimately, there isn't a timing. Okay, but Maru, I guess luckily, gets some advance notice by seeing time this far ahead. Not ahead in terms of numbers, but ahead in terms of position. That time's not sitting here. It's because if time was playing defensively with his army here, these units wouldn't be this far forward. Or if they were forward, they wouldn't be consolidated. You would have these 3 Reapers probably in 3 different locations. Here to spot for air, maybe right here to spot for maybe an air thing going this way, as well as a ground path. Here for ground stuff, and then, maybe the cyclone up here, or probably a cyclone here if it's separate, and then, so 1 Reaper, maybe here or here, 1 Reaper, etc. So, for these units to be consolidated, it's easy. I would think it'd be easy to assume that if these units aren't being defensive, aren't spotting, it's because time is already taking the initiative. And so Maru can see that time's being aggressive with these units, but he advances anyway.
Complete.
And now he's just completely losing. And so, if he retreated when he saw these units, he'd be fine. Or, after skirmishing with him, if he just sent a Marine ahead to look for the presence of Time's army, and then found it and retreated, he'd be fine. Instead, he had no spotters, no scouts, he just moved forward, lost half his army. Look at that. Look at that. That's disgusting. And so what gets me is this is a trend. These are the same kind of problems that Maru's had this whole series. And he hasn't focused on it to fix it. I mean, he's been adapting his builds, adapting his openings, adapting his tactics, but not adapting his scouting. Oh, that's funny. Time missed his armor. don't think there's anything else to see in this series, in this first series. Ultimately, the blunder that Maru made initially has snowballed into this position where time is just completely winning. I mean, that was a horrible attack by time, but he still has the supply advantage. Oh well. I think we've seen enough. I'm going to stop this video here, and I'll make a part 2 for the second series later.